Okay, welcome everyone. Today's class is called The Power of Words. Shmiras lashon, watching what we say. There's two basic Torah concepts when it comes to Shmiras lashon, guarding what we say. One is not speaking lashon hara. That's not speaking negatively against other people. And there's unos dvarim, causing pain with words. First, let's deal with lashon hara. There's a classic book on lashon hara by the Torah scholar and saintly person known as the Chafetz Chaim. Literally, Chafetz Chaim means wanting life. It's based on the verse in Tehillim in Psalms chapter 34. Mi ha'ish shechafetz chaim. Who's a person who wants life? Oev yamim liros tov. Loves days to see the good. Nitzor l'shoncha me'ra v'sfasecha me'daber mirma. Guard your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Now, this Torah scholar, Rabbi Meir HaKohen, wrote a book anonymously on the laws of lashon hara. And when it came known that he's the one that wrote the book, people called him the Chafetz Chaim. So he was referred to by the title of his book. My father, of blessed memory, was a student of his in Radin, Poland. Matter of fact, when my father had cancer, my father was in Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. My father told me that he wanted to be buried here in Eretz Yisrael, in Jerusalem, in Har Menuchos, and I should write in his matzeva, on his tombstone, I should write the sentence, Zocha lekabel Torah mipiv shemaron Chafetz Chaim barat. He merited to hear Torah from the mouth of the Chafetz Chaim in Ran. So growing up, my father always quoted his Rabbi. And my father didn't keep telling us, don't speak lashon hara, but rather he would always say the Chafetz Chaim didn't speak lashon hara. And the verse states that a school of arichas yamim, that you want to live a long time, we should have shmiras lashon. Watch what we say, not speaking negatively against others. So the Chafetz Chaim lived to 94. He had arichas yamim. And the Chafetz Chaim always used to say, especially when he got older, that if he would have died young, people would have said, hey, he wrote so careful that he spread this whole consciousness, that he died young. But the very fact that he had arichas yamim, they had a long life, people saw the fulfillment of this promise from this verse. What is considered lashon hara? It's saying that someone did something wrong, that someone has some faults, be it midos, be it character traits, saying that someone is not very bright. Anything that would be considered derogatory is lashon hara. Besides not speaking lashon hara, there's a prohibition against listening to lashon hara and not believing lashon hara if we happen to hear it. We shouldn't accept it as the absolute truth. Meichashmi boy, if it's necessary, practical, constructive purpose, you're allowed to be careful. You can be careful, but you're not allowed to accept it as the absolute truth, because something can be almost true, but it's not, and the real picture is totally different than what this negative statement would imply. And that a lot of people find challenging. How do you not believe lashon hara? A person seems to be an honest person. How do you not believe it? There's a very important principle in general semantics, but there's a fellow Krzyzewski wrote a book in 1933 called Science and Sanity. And he has the expression, all descriptions are maps, and the map is not the territory. All descriptions are maps, and the map is not the territory. So how you describe anybody is not a full picture of that person. It's only that subjective map. And there's always a context to every statement that's said. I'd like to give an example that Simon Wiesenthal, famous Nazi hunter, came to my hometown of Baltimore. I was already living here in Eretz Yisrael. I went to visit my mother, who still lived in Baltimore at the time. And Simon Wiesenthal spoke at a Jewish organization. And they showed him in a local television station in the news saying, the war has been over for so many years, and we have to forgive and forget. So the average person in Baltimore probably not too familiar who Simon Wiesenthal, couldn't care less. Okay. The Jews that were familiar with who he was were real surprised because his life mission was to bring Nazis to justice. So this definitely seemed very inconsistent with what he stood for and what he devoted his life to. People who were there were furious. Why? Because what he really said was, some people say, the war has been over for so many years, we have to forgive and forget. But I say we can never forgive and forget. So they spliced it. They only played the middle part. So people heard it and saw it. But what he really said was, some people say, he wasn't even saying it himself, he was quoting some people. And then he said, I argue with them totally. I feel that we can always have to bring Nazis to justice. Total distortion. So 3 days later, they said, if we took anything the Simon Wiesenthal said out of context, we apologize. Probably so the lawyer said they can't get sued, and so they took it out of they gave an apology. So this is the practical problem in everything we hear about another person. There's always a context. There's always what is said, what's the whole picture of this person. And the map is not the territory. So how do you not believe lashon hara? The answer is, it's never actually total true. Now, some people bring out the best in people, some people bring out the worst in people. So when somebody's saying something negative about another person, people who are very critical and negative will see the negative in others. People who are very ayin tova, good eye. That's why in Pirkei Avos, we find Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great Torah scholar, had 5 disciples, and he told them to go out and do a research project and come back and find and report on which quality is such a positive quality that's worth devoting our life to. The 5 students came back with different qualities, and one said ayin tova, good eye. Now, a person with an ayin tova, a good eye, will see totally different things than ayin ra, a person with a negative eye. A person with a critical negative eye will always see what's wrong with people, what did they do wrong, what faults they have. A person with an ayin tova will see the good in people. Moreover, we'll bring out in people. We bring out in other people the way we are, the way we see them. Not speaking lashon hara, not believing it, and not listening. Now, what do you do if somebody tells you lashon hara? So we have a responsible to tell the person, I don't want to hear it. I remember once in my father's shul, there were 2 people who just came to shul to say Kaddish and weren't that familiar with the laws of Torah. And they started waiting for Mariv, between Mincha and Mariv, the afternoon service and the evening services. These 2 people started speaking against somebody. And there's a man who was a regular attendant in the shul, who was very careful with mitzvahs. He turned around to them and said, I have enough faults of my own, I don't need to hear about the faults of others. I heard this around 50 years ago, and it stuck in my mind because I have enough faults of my own, I don't need to hear about the faults of others. What are you going to say? You don't have enough faults of your own, you do need to hear the faults of others. How do you argue with it? So that consciousness of, he didn't blame them, he didn't speak strongly against them, and they immediately changed the subject. I remember there was a fellow, when I was in yeshiva, as a young student, who read Ripley's Believe It or Not, which had a lot of very interesting and irrelevant pieces of information. And if somebody started speaking lashon hara, he would throw out a piece of information he saw in Ripley's Believe It or Not. And they would start speaking, not true, not true. He would get them to change the subject. Now, ideally, we should say, oh, you know what, we should really speak good about people, we shouldn't speak bad about people, but sometimes it'll be very hard to do. And this fellow had a very practical idea, change the subject. And people do that automatically. Everybody has topics they're interested in talking about, topics they're not interested in talking about, and they'll change the subject towards what they're interested in. That's why it's good to have stories on your fingertips. And if somebody starts speaking lashon hara, you can always say, oh, this reminds me of a story. And the reason you can say that is because, I'm saying now, somebody speaks negatively against others, have a few favorite stories. Like my neighbor, Rabbi Chaim Aron, just came out with the second volume of his book. He's a fundraiser for Torah Or Yeshiva, Rabbi Scheinberg's Yeshiva. So he has a book called The Collector's Collection. And now he has the second volume, Collector's Collection Volume 2. All different, very interesting stories about fundraisers for all different charities and kindnesses and yeshivas. So he's like very fascinating stories. And let's just say a story. I once heard Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who for 20 years was the head of Mir Yeshiva. He was from Chicago, and he had Parkinson's for his last 28 years. That means when he took the mantle of the Mir Yeshiva, he already had Parkinson's. And Parkinson's is very debilitating. And a lot of people wouldn't go around fundraising, would find excuses, doesn't have the energy to do things. And amazing biography written about him. First 100 pages from his mother, and then hundreds of pages from a student of Mir Yeshiva, gathered together, amazing person. So I once heard Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel, Yeshiva of Mir, I once heard him at a gathering about Shmiras Lashon. Being careful what we say. It was for children, young children, on Chol Hamoed, Pesach, the intermediate days of the holiday of Passover. And he was the guest speaker. And he got up to speak, and he was feeling very, very weak. And by him feeling very weak means literally he didn't have any energy. Because every word we say, you need some energy. Usually we have enough energy, we can talk. So he was feeling very weak, and most people would have said, I can't speak. Instead, he got up to speak, and he just had the energy for 3 words. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which means in English, love other people as yourself. You love people as yourself, you won't speak negatively against others. Nobody wants other people speaking negatively against them. And he sat down. He didn't have any more energy to speak. So that 3-word drasha, that 3-word speech, to me personally was very inspirational because it conveyed the message with just 3 words. And that's really the essence of Shmiras Lashon. We should love people, care about them. They're important to us. When people are important to you and you care about them, you don't want to cause them pain in any way. And some people say, just words. But words are powerful. Moves v'chayim b'yad lashon. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Our words. Words are powerful. With words you can inspire. With words you can encourage. And with words you can cause despair and discouragement. So the words we say make a major impact in people's lives. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, who was head of the Mir Yeshiva before Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz used to say that the concept of Shmiras Lashon, not speaking against others, doesn't really start with dibur. It doesn't start with speech. It starts with how we think about others. When you see another person, how do you think about that person? Do you identify with their strengths or their weaknesses? Their good points or their bad points? So how we think about people, that's the starting point. Because what we're thinking when we think of someone will be how we speak about them. Now there's definitely a lot of questions. Sometimes we'll have a question, okay, is this right to say, not to say? But you're allowed to say for practical constructive purposes. For instance, there was over here in Jerusalem, there was a fellow who sold apartments in a building, and the problem was that he sold more apartments in that building than there were actually apartments there. So he sold a lot of the apartments twice. And but he was building the building. He told some people, don't come around the morning, don't come around the afternoon. And other people said, only come around the afternoon, don't come around the morning. So while they're in the process of building, people come to look at their apartments, see the progress. And he almost got away with it, but eventually two people came at the same time. He says, what are you doing here? He says, I bought this apartment. He says, I bought the apartment, it's my apartment. He says, no, it's my apartment. And they both brought out their contract. They saw that he sold them the same apartment. So let's say you know that somebody is doing something like that. It's a mitzvah to warn people, this person's dishonest. This person's selling apartments that aren't there, that have never been sold. So it's necessary, practical, constructive purpose. That it's appropriate and even obligatory. So some questions will come up, should I say something here or not? But in many, many situations, there's no question. It's really obvious this is not a thing to say. If we spoke lashon hara, what should we do? You have to ask mechila. You have to ask forgiveness. And the big problem with lashon hara is that even if you ask forgiveness, the harm has been caused. Now, when I wrote an adaptation, the first book I wrote was an adaptation of the Chafetz Chaim, a book called Guard Your Tongue. And I wrote a piece in the book that dangerous wires, that with the invention of the telephone, used to be, speak lashon hara, you have to walk around. That's why it says in the verse, don't go about as a peddler. Why a peddler? Because a peddler, in order to sell things, you have to buy and sell. You buy low, sell high, and you have to get things to sell. You have to go around and get it. So, to get lashon hara, you have to go around. Then with the telephone, you can stay in your own house, and on the telephone, you can hear negative about people, repeat it. Today, with mass media, with the internet, with a person writing negative against other people, it's much worse. Because a telephone, it's one person talking to another person. If a person writes something negative, but lashon hara is not only speaking negative, but writing something negative about another person, it's lashon hara. So here it's worse because you can write something negative about another person and it stays. 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later, what you wrote negatively will be seen about that person. And that's why bullying, writing negatively against others, is considered such a serious thing because it's powerful. In the old days, to write up something, you have to get it written up in a book, get something written in a newspaper. But here, anybody can just write something negative about another person. It doesn't have to be true. So we have to be very, 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 very careful that because communication has gotten much more sophisticated, more powerful, we have to be much more careful how we speak about people. Then there's onos dvarim, causing pain with words. Causing pain with words. That any form of, the Medrash tells a story that Rabbi Huda Nasi, compiler of the Mishnah, invited his students for a meal. And at the meal, he served tongue. And he noticed that the students were choosing the soft pieces of tongue and leaving over the pieces that were hard. So he said, the same way that when you choose meat to eat, you're going to choose the meat that's softer and leaving over the meat that's harder, so too, when you speak, choose words that are soft, leave over words that are harsh. So my Rabbi, the late head of Brisk Yeshiva, Rabbi Yasher Soloveitchik, said on this, like that. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's students were for sure careful about not openly insulting each other. And when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi served meat at a meal, for sure, he'd only serve meat that was edible. But he wanted to show him a lesson. even if food is edible, as long as you can differentiate between two pieces of meat, one's softer, one's a little better, you're going to choose that's softer. When you eat, you look around for what's better. So too, when you speak, not only open insults, open put-downs are considered onos dvarim, but as long as you can find a better way of saying, another way of speaking that's more sensitive, it's more careful, we have an obligation to be as careful as possible. So it's a beautiful concept that not only not openly speaking negative against others, but to others, but as long as we can find a better way of saying it, we have to be more sensitive. And the Talmud, Tractate Bava states that a nos dvarim, causing pain with words, is worse than a nos mammon. It's worse than cheating somebody financially. And the Talmud says, why? One, money you can return. Let's say a person took money they shouldn't have taken. You can go and return it. Words you can't take back. Words were said and caused pain. You say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, but you still cause pain. And some people, for years, they can keep the negative things. You find some people will tell you about some teacher back when they were third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade that said very negative things to them, insulted them, and they still remember it and then how the harm that it caused. Because money can return. I remember there was a fellow, Steve Terrace, who used to be in charge of DLC, and Steve Terrace lived here in the Jewish Quarter, and when his wife was ready to give birth to a child, they got a taxi about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the taxi driver said, he started driving without putting on the meter, and he said, this is my price. And so he said, Steve said to the taxi driver, that sounds way too expensive. Put on the meter. He says, I'm not going to put on the meter. That's my price. You don't want to pay it? Get out. And they're ready by Shari Shem, Nablus Gate. So 2 o'clock in the morning, rushing to the hospital, they're not going to get out by Nablus Gate. Like, ridiculous. But he says, look, it's not right of you. It's dishonest. He said, but that's my price. Take it or leave it. I'm not forcing you to stay in my taxi, but that's what I'm charging you. So he said, it's not right, okay, you'll charge, okay, I'll pay it, but it's not right. So he left him off at the hospital, they made it on time, he had a baby, his wife had a baby boy. He comes back the next morning, visiting hours, and he sees the taxi driver. So he's thinking, what does he want, more money? And the taxi driver said, I came here to ask you forgiveness, to return the money, because I couldn't sleep all night. It wasn't right what I did. So here's a person that it was really not right of him to charge such an exorbitant price to go to they needed the taxi. It wasn't right of him, but he regretted it and he returned it. Words can stay. You can say things that cause such pain, and especially people have considered very traumatic, negative things said to them by teachers, kids in school laughed at them, made fun of them. Very, 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 very painful for years later, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years later. Yes?
The pain associated with loss of money is not part of the veil? But by loss of money, there's also pain.
But it's not personal. And that's the reason the Gemara says that money, it's the person's wallet. It's not the person himself. When you, in those dvarim, it's the essence of the person himself. So that's more painful. That's why it's worse. So it means there's a guy who's in jail for 150 years because he did a Ponzi scheme and it wasn't right, but and rightly so. Everybody said, like, this guy, he took people's money, and to some people he gave them money back through getting money from more people, but a lot of people lost all their money, and he was considered real evil. In jail for 150 years, which means a lifetime in jail. However, onos dvarim, causing pain with words, is worse in the sense of causing people tremendous amount of pain. Some say, well, just words, and I'm just joking, and they shouldn't be so sensitive. you can't say that somebody shouldn't be so sensitive. It's normal for our human beings to be sensitive. That is the normal way we are. We're sensitive. And that obligation to be careful. Chazon Ish writes that even if a Nos Dvarim causes pain for a short time, not only like open, serious offense of very serious negativity is considered Nos Dvarim, but even if it's a little bit of the stress is also considered a Nos Dvarim. And there's a very valuable book. I wrote a book, Power of Words, which is now not in print. Based on my book, there's a book called, by the Chofetz Chaim Heritage Foundation, called Positive Word Power, which I highly recommend people to read. Somebody wrote me, I noticed from your book, there's 10 different principles, what's considered a Nos Dvarim. 10 different categories. And so what the Chofetz Chaim Heritage Foundation did, based on that list of 10 different principles, what would be considered a Nos Dvarim, what would be considered pain with words. They wrote a whole book on it with examples. Beautiful book, very worthwhile reading. And lashon hara, sometimes you don't cause a person a loss. It's a minor thing, and the people hearing it never met that person you're speaking about. So lashon hara sometimes can cause tremendous loss, but sometimes it doesn't cause personal pain. A Nos Dvarim, on the other hand, causing pain with words always causes pain, because that's the essence of what a Nos Dvarim is, causing pain. So we, out of love of other people, v'ahavta kamocha, and for our own personal benefit, we live a long time. And the more we have this ayin tova, good eye, we see the good in people. We spoke about how kamayim apanim lepanim, kein lev adam ladam, as water face to face, so the heart of one person another, that how you speak about people, how the energy you give out. If you give out positive energy to people, people feel positive back. So just enlightened self-interest say we should be careful. All the more so, spiritually speaking, we elevate ourselves by being careful. And why do people speak lashon hara? One reason, anger. We lose our temper. We speak negatively against others. Omer mutter. Person thinks, well, this isn't really lashon hara. That's why the importance of studying the laws to know what's included in lashon hara. Litzanis, making fun of people. So whatever reason a person might speak lashon hara, and one major reason, people want to feel good about themselves, so they speak bad about others, implying, oh, they have this fault, I don't have this fault. So when we want to build ourselves, we should do it through positive actions, make positive goals, but not causing harm to others, not speaking negatively against others, not because putting somebody down in order to build ourselves up doesn't build us, it really lowers us. And that principle of v'ahavta kamocha, love others people as yourself. We want to help people in every way humanly possible. We don't want to cause pain financially. We don't want to cause pain in any form or shape, and especially power of words, using words. We do great acts of kindness, great mitzvahs through using our power of speech, and we want to use it in a positive way the way our Creator wanted us to use it, and not chas v'shalom, negative.